Chapter 9. The Verdict. Dr. Ellison's learned testimony notwithstanding, the second day of Lovett's inquest bore little resemblance to the first. Gone was the pretext of reconstructing Annie's final hours. The sole remaining goal of the inquiry was to gather sufficient ammunition to eviscerate Wheeler. The quest for understanding had been shelved. In its stead, the lynching of Peter Wheeler began in earnest. The lone voices of reason, Drs. Lovett and Ellison, were quickly drowned out by a chorus of accusations ringing forth from the Parker brothers and their supporters. One by one, the citizens of Bear River took the stand and laid waste to Wheeler's name and reputation. Hostile to a man, the tiny hamlet had transformed overnight into a seething mob bent on meting out their notions of justice. If the mood had changed, so too had much of the previous day's testimony. Everyone in the village suddenly recalled seeing Wheeler near the Kempton home that fateful day. Herbert Comeau, who shared his home with Wheeler, said under oath that he saw Peter on the road leading to Annie's house in the late afternoon. Sadie Morini, Grace's more agreeable younger sister, testified to seeing Peter near the Kemptons between 5 o'clock and 6 p.m. Elmer Crabb, who lived across the road from Annie and her kin, also reported seeing the accused in the area as the sun was setting. Still others offered new testimonies suggesting Wheeler had lusted after Annie, making no secret of his immoral designs on her. Herbert Parker's accusations had taken hold and festered in the minds of those who once called Wheeler friend. Bear River became a collective of armchair psychiatrists, parsing Wheeler's every word and deed, looking for signs of his evil intent. At least 3 people took the stand to tell of Wheeler's seemingly odd behavior in the hours after Annie's body was discovered, converting simple personality quirks into pathognomonic symptoms of mental derangement. Most damning of all, 2 more people stepped forward and again accused Wheeler of lying. The first was Stanley Rice. Rice had testified on the first day of the inquest, offering little of substance. By day 2, Rice was rabid, foaming at the mouth to retake the stand and refute some previous testimony. During her statement, Wheeler's landlady Tilly Comeau mentioned that Peter had been at Rice's place around sunset, still considered to be the time of the murder in spite of Dr. Ellison's testimony. On his best days, Stanley Rice was as subtle and humorless as a hatchet, but on this particular day he practically levitated out of the witness chair, so certain was he that Wheeler had not been at his home that evening. It was, proclaimed Rice, just another of Wheeler's countless lies to cover his heinous deed. Had cooler heads prevailed, Rice's histrionics would have flamed out before impact. As is sometimes the case in legal proceedings, everyone was telling the truth, at least as they understood it. The mystery surrounding Wheeler's whereabouts, like the fracas over who was to stay with Annie that night, was a simple misunderstanding blown out of all proportion. Wheeler had been on Rice's property as dusk fell, checking his rabbit snares in the fields. In the heat of the moment, Stanley thought Tilly's testimony implied Wheeler was in the house, rather than just on the land. Neither Tilly nor Wheeler had been mendacious as to his whereabouts, merely imprecise. As for Stanley Rice, he simply overreacted. Wheeler's second and more damaging accuser was Louis Jeremy, an elder of the local Micmac band, although in press accounts he was known simply as the Indian who testified. Jeremy lived on the same road as the Kemptons, and after hearing Annie had been murdered, he went to pay his respects at their house. Jeremy then went down to the Comeau house, where he found Peter Wheeler sitting in the kitchen. According to Jeremy, the 2 men got into a heated discussion as to the position of Annie's body. The crime scene had been anything but closed and members of the community wandered through at will. By the time Jeremy, and most of Bear River, viewed Annie's remains, she was supine on the sitting room floor. When Wheeler discovered the body, however, she had been on her knees with her head and torso slumped forward, face to the floor. Jeremy said that, as they debated the issue, Wheeler actually jumped up and demonstrated the awkward pose for him, a scene Jeremy reenacted in the Oakdene Academy before a mortified audience. In truth, both Wheeler and Jeremy had accurately reported the position of Annie's body as they had seen it. In the interval between Wheeler's discovery and Jeremy's observations, Lovett and other officials had repositioned the body to protect the girl's dignity. That Annie's body was so easily manipulated indicates that rigor mortis had not yet paid her inevitable post-mortem call. Louis Jeremy's testimony, however, ignited a firestorm on 2 counts. The first was that it suggested Wheeler was lying about the position of the girl, raising the disturbing possibility he had committed further indignities to Annie's remains in the morning before alerting the neighbors to her death, a shockingly salacious allegation that reverberated within the Academy's walls. That a rumor is loud does not make it true, however. Review of the witness statements from the first responders to the scene indicate Annie was still in the prone position described by Wheeler when they arrived. Furthermore, according to Ellison's autopsy findings, the lividity in Annie's body supported Wheeler's version of events. The Mortis sisters once again came to Wheeler's defense, for all the good it would do. The second rumor spawned by Jeremy's incendiary testimony was as logically inconsistent as it was excoriating for Wheeler. In this particular tale of the tape, Wheeler's account as to the positioning of Annie's body was accepted as true. However, in this version Wheeler added a single pertinent detail. He supposedly told Jeremy the girl's throat was cut several times. When Jeremy viewed the body, Annie was covered with a quilt and the nature of her injuries was not apparent. Within minutes, all of Bear River knew Annie was murdered, but few knew the specifics of her wounds. Donning their detective caps, many were led to wonder, if Annie's body were face down, obscuring her neck, how had Wheeler known her throat was slashed? Clearly, the would-be Holmes and Watsons of Bear River reason, Wheeler knew the exact cause of Annie's death not because he had seen it when he found the body but because he was her killer. It was a classic gotcha moment, ripped from the pages of a panto crime drama. It was also the sort of faulty reasoning that springs from overactive imaginations. Although prone, Annie's face was turned to the side, leaving her neck exposed, a pallid island in the lake of blood seeping from it. Her wounds were equally evident to officials and onlookers who saw her in the moments following the discovery of the crime, before her body was covered for modesty's sake. Amidst the turbulent rumors, speculation, and outright fabrications of the inquest's second day, the previous day's uncertainty was mere flotsam, swept to sea by an undercurrent of fear. In its wake, a single absolute conviction bobbed to the surface: Peter Wheeler was guilty. The rules of evidence, at first relaxed, were now abandoned and replaced with mob rule. Conscious deliberation and reason gave way to an insatiable, irrational thirst for vengeance. With the citizenry now squarely against Wheeler, one last witness took the stand to deliver a final emotional wallop. Strangely enough, this most powerful witness never implicated Peter Wheeler or even cast a glance in his direction, a nuance lost on the distraught crowd. By this point, the mob tolerated no dissension in their ranks and saw only what they wanted to see. As the audience sat spellbound, a lone hunched figure labored his way to the front of the hall. Silence fell, a conscious show of respect for the witness, Annie's father, Isaac Kempton. Grief alone did not account for his slow progression. Isaac had lost a foot at the ankle in a lumbering accident and made his way through life on an ill-fitting cork prosthesis. His disability had taken its toll. Isaac's face, doughy and long gone to seed, with loosening skin that threatened to swallow his eyes whole, was never truly handsome and now was a monument to misery. Adrift in a fog of guilt, memory, and regret, Isaac Kempton was a lost and ruined man, kept aloft only by his sense of duty to his surviving family. Isaac was bereaved yet composed on the stand as he told of his final moments with Annie that Monday morning, when he and his son Ernest left for the logging camp. He also repeated the story that overnight had taken on near mythic proportions. Before he left, Kempton had arranged with Tilly Comeau to come and stay with Annie. If Isaac bore Tilly any ill will, he kept it to himself and his eyes never found hers in the crowded hall. A normally stoic man, he now wept openly before his grief-stricken neighbors as he recounted how he learned of Annie's murder from a man at the logging camp. Confronted with a father's unfathomable heartache, the prosecution still had a job to do. Under gentle but persistent questioning, acting prosecutor J.M. Owen coaxed Isaac into describing the condition of his cow upon his return. It seemed an odd, almost callous segue after such an emotionally charged account. Isaac Kempton, numb to such trivial distinctions, told how the cow gave twice its normal supply when milked on Tuesday afternoon. The line of questioning threw many in the audience, who could not imagine why a grieving father was made to recall such mundane details at a time like this. There was, of course, method in Owen's madness. The prosecutor, under the watchful eye of Detective Power, sought to establish a new timeline of events, one very much at odds with the time of death estimate provided by Dr. Robert Ellison. The significance of the cow became clear when it was revealed that one of Annie's daily chores was to milk the animal by 6 p.m. Annie had obviously not completed her evening chore on time, as the beast's udder was painfully swollen on Tuesday afternoon. Speaking through his proxy, Prosecutor Owen, Detective Power argued that the cow was proof Annie had been killed before 6 o'clock on Monday, the only time Power could put Wheeler alone near the Kempton house. To drive home this highly contentious point, Owen offered this brief summation: with all due respect to the good Dr. Ellison and his scientific ponderings, a cow never lies. It was, declared the prosecution, all but certain Annie was killed on Monday between 5 o'clock and 6 p.m. As Owen ruminated on the cow, the inquest was at long last nearing an end. By the close of the Wednesday evening session, a total of 24 witnesses had taken the stand, a few more than once. Most had, in some fashion, implicated Peter Wheeler as the killer. Throughout the tortured course of the hearing, the prosecution's theory of the crime had formed and crystallized. At approximately 5 o'clock, Wheeler went to the Kempton home, where he knew Annie would be alone. In a lustful frenzy, he tried to ravage the girl, but she had fought valiantly for her virtue. Enraged at being denied, Wheeler struck her across the head, then cut her throat. There was, at least to Powers and Owen's way of thinking, nothing more to be gained from the inquest. Dr. Lovett, the nominal head of the proceedings, concurred. The time had come for the coroner and his jury to render a verdict. After receiving their instructions from Owen, the jury was sent to deliberate. Those left behind in the hall did not have long to wait. In short order, Lovett and the 12 jurymen filed back into the Academy's main gallery. Absolute silence fell as Lovett returned to the podium. The crowd sat so transfixed, one might have performed surgery on him without the benefit of anesthesia, if so inclined. In a clear and steady voice, the coroner read the verdict. We do upon oath say that Annie Kempton, between the hours of 5 in the afternoon of Monday, the 27th day of January, and the hour of 8 o'clock in the morning of Tuesday, 28th day of January, aforesaid, was violently assaulted and struck on the forehead and had several heavy blows and had her throat cut in several places, causing her death. And we further say that the said Annie Kempton was thereby feloniously killed and murdered at her father's residence in Bear River. In deference to both his colleague Ellison and the detective from Halifax, Lovett had wisely built some latitude into his estimate of the time of death, concluding only that it must have occurred between the time she was last seen in town and the time her body was found. It was a judicious compromise that belied Lovett's inexperience as a coroner. The coroner's verdict thus far was proper and exactly as all expected, but there remained one final codicil that would change everything, and we suspect Peter Wheeler of Bear River in the county of Digby, Yeoman, to be guilty of the said murder of Annie Kempton. After a shocked moment of silence, the capacity crowd erupted, releasing a paroxysm of fury that threatened to bring the Academy down on their very heads. As the cacophony reached fever pitch, Dr. Lovett calmly affixed his signature to the inquest report and gathered his papers. Seemingly oblivious to the uproar, he paused to thank the men of the jury for their faithful service, had a quick word with Detective Power and Prosecutor Owen, then slipped quietly from the hall and made for home. As the boisterous throng flowed from the schoolhouse into the frozen streets of Bear River, one man was conspicuous in his absence. Peter Wheeler, the focus of the day's inquisition and the object of such derision among his former acquaintances, was not on hand to hear himself labeled a murderer. Detective Nicholas Power had arrested him hours before, as if already certain of the jury's verdict.